And that was the biggest transition, because what happened was, it was the first time in my marriage that I was no longer the breadwinner. I was no longer the one that brought in the lion's share of the income. And that completely changed the dynamic of my relationship with my husband, who suddenly became very controlling. And all of the things that I thought about our marriage and his belief in equality and his belief in me as an individual rapidly went out the
Hi,
window.
Kasey. How are you? Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Denise. I'm doing just ducky.
Well, that's a new one for me. I usually say I'm doing peachy, but it can be sarcastic at the same time. So, we'll see.
Yeah. I use that
But
expression myself quite often. It's either peachy or ducky.
hey, Kasey. So, if you can tell me who is Kasey Rogers, once we take away your achievements, everything that you have accomplished, what would that be that you will say is Kasey?
I think at the heart of my existence is a person that really wants to make an impact in other people's lives and use the skills that I've developed to help my children. I have twins that I absolutely adore. They're in their mid 20s, and I want a better world for them. So, almost all of the things that I'm motivated by are things that I hope will empower them to be really kind and loving people. So I think that puts me in a position to say, I'm a mom. I'm somebody that I love being a mother to these two kids, and all the other things kind of center around being a mom.
So just kind of like that nurturing, that compassion, that loving touch, just to see them grow and take care of them.
Yeah, yeah. And it's funny because I didn't have children until I was 42. And then I had twins, and I never wanted to be a mother before that. And so my answer kind of surprises me as well, because I've always thought of myself first as a creative person. Um, Creativity has always been my go to thing for enjoyment. But even now, my creativity is more centered on things that I think will make their lives better, and utilizing my creative skills. I'm not saying that I don't use any of my creative skills for the things that give me pleasure creating, but most of the things that I'm doing are things that I believe will make life better for them and the people that I love and care about. And even those that I don't
Okay.
really even know.
Yes, and you actually do that as well too. So, but that will be a little bit towards the end. Um, what would you say that it was a pivotal moment? I mean, being 42 and then having a baby and then knowing that it's actually babies. Like, like for me, like, I was already done a long time ago before that time. So, but my goodness, there's actually, I got multiple questions and I don't even know, like, I'm thinking right now, like, what a journey for you to be able to have, a career, and be able to experience things, and then preparing yourself to be a mom after you have become this person, and now you were already trying to become somebody else for them. Um, I don't know. How was that transition like for you? I know there's like multiple question in one question, so feel free to answer however you feel that is needed.
Okay. It was it was easy to love them and embrace being a mom. And it was easy to, even the sleepless nights, want always what was best for them. What was difficult and what led me to this moment was really the adjustment of no longer having a career. I worked in New York City for many years and was kind of at the forefront of the internet. I worked in broadcast production for some very large ad agencies. And when the internet came along, I had an opportunity to switch from broadcast production to interactive production. And I was one of the first interactive producers in New York. So I was headhunted by a lot of agencies, and I ended up with working for J. Walter Thompson. And this was when the babies were small, and I commuted several. I lived 2.5 hours away from New York City, so I commuted 3 days a week, and I worked at home 2 days a week. And when my son came down with a very, very high fever when he was at the nannies, I decided to quit my job and be home with them full time. And that was the biggest transition, because what happened was it was the first time in my marriage that I was no longer the breadwinner. I was no longer the one that brought in the lion's share of the income. And that completely changed the dynamic of my relationship with my husband, who suddenly became very controlling. And all of the things that I thought about our marriage and his belief in equality and his belief in me as an individual rapidly went out the window. So the first years of my children's life was an amazing adjustment from being this person that was very, very independent and used to having access to my own income, to being married to somebody who questioned every move I made financially and became very coercive in terms of his control of me. Um, that's not to say that there weren't some very wonderful moments when my kids were little, because I just enjoyed them so much. But the thing about being in a relationship that goes sideways once children are born is that you it starts to bring out a different dynamic. And that's what I discovered. And it wasn't all the time. It was just mostly over financial things that had really changed. And his belief that now that I wasn't bringing in the same amount of income or more than he was, that I didn't have the right to make the decision. So he got to the point where, like just about every major decision in our life, he felt that he had the right to override my concern or ability to have an equal say in what went on. So, does that
How
answer your
long were
question?
you married? Oh,
Um,
I'm so sorry.
no, no, it's okay. Um, we were married for 25 years. So,
Okay.
and we were married for 12 years before we had kids. So our
Oh,
relationship,
wow.
yeah, and the thing is that we moved out from New York City to an area that was a couple hours, well, actually by bus it was 2.5 hours from New York. And I commuted in every single day while my husband worked freelance. So sometimes he might have a job where he would work 3 or 4 months, but then he would have several months off. So and even when he was working, he didn't necessarily have to go into the city all the time. So I spent a lot of time. I rented an apartment with a friend of mine. Actually, I rented a room in her apartment, and we were apart a lot of the time. So when we saw each other, it was always this perpetual honeymoon. Um, we would spend time on the weekends, hunting for antiques for our Victorian house, or going down the river in a raft, or movies and dinners, and all of those things that couples do when they don't have the obligation of children. But once we had the twins, um, again, the dynamic changed completely. I was always the one tasked with taking care of them, even though my role in the marriage, like, again, I had supported him. I was the reason why he was able to work everything. I was
Yeah.
the reason because I had the health insurance. I had the steady job. There were times that, I mean, there was 3 years of our marriage that he didn't work because he had a very horrible thing happen to him where a business partner embezzled all the money from their company, and he was just devastated by that. So instead of working outside, he completely renovated a Victorian house that we bought. So, and that was fine with me. I was making, a huge amount of money, and it didn't matter to me because, again, it wasn't that he wasn't working, he just wasn't working and making an income. And I just felt, we were both doing what benefited both of us. But the way that things unfolded after we had children, his attitude changed dramatically. So that when I wasn't bringing in the kind of money, I worked tons of different jobs. I mean, I was a webmaster. I got my real estate license. I taught school. I did all of these small part-time jobs so that I could stay home with my kids. But because I wasn't making the lion's share of the income anymore, he just felt that he had the right to tell me what to do, um, in some of the most unflattering ways. I'll give you a little example. When we were traveling one time, we were going back to see his parents in Massachusetts. We had absolutely no deadline for when we got there, but traveling with the two kids, we were staying overnight at a hotel. And my daughter wasn't feeling very well. She was a little fussy. And I wanted to go in and take a shower. That's all I wanted. I wanted to take a shower. And he was very upset with me because he said, like, it would prevent them from going to sleep, it would prevent him from going to sleep, and, wanted me to take it in the morning. I was fine. Okay, I'll take it in the morning. Well, when I got up in the morning and wanted to take my shower, he insisted that we had no time to do that, and that um, not only did we not have time, he said that if I got into the shower, he would take my purse, he would take all the money, and he would take the kids and leave me stranded because he didn't want me to take a shower. I mean, I'm not one of those people that gets into the shower for an hour, 5 minutes max. I know how to get it done. So that was the level of control that he started to exhibit. You know, if it wasn't his way, then it wasn't important. So those
Did
are the kind.
he?
Mhm.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Did he show any signs before you had the kids about how he was, or?
Good question. He did, but I did not recognize them. I had no idea that much of his behavior really aligned with somebody that exercises coercive control. And some of those examples would be, at that point in my life, I was also, besides the fact that I worked in advertising, I was also writing a musical. And I got very, very far with it. And I was getting a lot of interaction with some, big people on Broadway. And he was very jealous of that and very upset because he was an enormously talented writer and producer and director. There wasn't anything that he couldn't do in the film industry. And he also liked to write plays. So whenever anybody got involved with me over my musical, especially if it was a woman, they're just using you. The only reason why they're friends with you is because they know that you're going to be successful and they're going to ride on your coattails. He isolated me all the time. The only people that he seemed to approve of were some of my family members, but my family, I'm the youngest of 7, and we were scattered throughout the United States. It's not like I got to see them very often. My parents, when they were alive, they had moved to Florida. I might have seen them once or twice a year, and then when my mom passed away when the kids were little, I saw my dad like maybe once a year. So the isolation. The other thing was that I didn't realize is that whenever we were together, he would do this thing that I cringe even thinking about it right now, but I didn't realize how controlling it was. And what he used to do was he used to take the back of my neck when we were walking, and he would hold me by the back of my neck to direct me. He would, if we were in a situation where we were at a friend's house, he would sit so close to me and, hold my hand, and, he was very possessive of me when we were in those kind of social situations. There were just so many signs, but I didn't know that they were signs. And again, it wasn't all the time. Most of the time, it seemed like we had a good marriage. And I would always describe it as we had an 80-20 relationship. That 80% of the time, we were fine. And he was not the jerk that he suddenly started to, it suddenly started to be the 20-80 relationship where he was a jerk 80% of the time. But I didn't see it. And you know what? I didn't see it until I started writing about it, because I thought it was just a bad marriage. I didn't understand that the things that he did were indicative of somebody who exhibits abuse. And it started really coming to light when I was in a master's program years later, and I was tasked to write a work of nonfiction, and I wrote a story, and one of my peers in the program said, "You have to turn this into a memoir." And it was during the time of COVID. I was working as a teacher, and I started writing about it, but I also had my journals and I had emails. I am one of those people, I never delete an email. So I had all of his emails and everything. And I was shocked at all of the things that I had forgotten and that I had swept aside, just trying to navigate a relationship with this man that I loved, who completely betrayed me in so many ways. So I sat there one day in the beginning of COVID and I wrote 30,000 words. Now, most writers might write 1,500 to 2,000 words, max 3,000. I just vomited on the page. I just wrote and wrote and wrote from my journals, from the emails, from the things that I dug up, and I still couldn't call it abuse. I was too humiliated by that word. It was like, how does someone like me, and I'm saying that in quotes because abuse happens to everybody or anybody. It's not about your education or your social standing or any of those things. I knew brilliant women who have fallen into the same traps, but I didn't know. I just thought we had a bad marriage and that for some reason he had fallen out of love with me and he just couldn't cope with, some of the things that he was the one that made these decisions and couldn't cope with it. And then I finally, in the second round of edits, started to realize I was in an abusive relationship.
Oh my goodness. I do have to tell you, thank you for being so vulnerable right now and sharing all this from your past story, because it is so important for many people, women, to understand that sometimes you can be in it and have no idea what's going on, how you're little by little every day being brainwashed to be exactly what this other person wants you to be. Yes. And coming from domestic violence abuse, I couldn't see it. Mm-hmm. And it's funny because I also thought that it was just a bad marriage.
Yeah.
But a marriage that divorce did not exist and we were still going to continue. So I hope and pray that your vulnerability helps other women to kind of realize that, oh wait, like what you said about the hand, I'm like, oh my gosh, that was done to me. Wow, it's just a little signs that you just don't know.
Yeah. And for me, the thing is that the course that our marriage took was highly unusual and played out very dramatically, because when we were, the kids were about 6.5 and he lost his job. He had been working for an advertising agency that merged with another company, and it was his first full-time job during our marriage. And so he was out of work for a while, and he decided he wanted us to move to Canada. And we had owned vacation property in Canada before, and I was working, I think at the time, as a mobile notary. So my job as a notary was to go to people's homes and have them sign loan documents for second and sometimes third mortgages. And I kept on saying to my husband, this is not right. These are people that are taking out loans on their houses and putting themselves into so much debt that they will never be able to recover. And the mortgages that they're taking out exceed the values of their home. And he would say, you're crazy, you don't know anything. At this point, he started really belittling me. I knew nothing. I was, his thing that he used to say to me all the time was, "What's wrong with you?" Those kind of things. So I was getting to the point where I was starting to have a lot of self-doubt. So I thought maybe he's right. But when he came to me and said he wanted to move to Canada because he was of French-Canadian descent, I said, let's do it. Because the American dollar was very strong against the Canadian dollar, and we could buy a property in Canada for a fraction of the cost of what we could sell our home in the US. So we did that, and we moved up to Canada. We bought a property that was an income property, and the goal was to turn it into a restaurant, the one floor, and then we would live above the restaurant in an apartment, and then we would have an apartment in the back to rent out. Well, 4 months after we moved up there, he took a job back in the United States, leaving me with 9-year-old twins to run a restaurant pretty much by myself.
Oh my goodness.
But here's the thing, Denise, it was the best thing that ever happened to me, because it was not until that point that I could breathe again. I finally understood the level of anxiety that he caused in my life. Just when he would walk through the door, my whole demeanor would change, trying to figure out who was going to walk through the door. Was it going to be my very loving, kind, funny, charming husband? Or was it going to be that person who leveled so much animosity and just, there's no other word for it, just hatred. Everything that went wrong was my fault. Even one time, when I was up there after he left, I only had one day to do all the grocery shopping, do all the laundry, make sure the kids were on track with homework and everything. I went to the laundromat, and he left. He only came up like every 2-3 weeks, and he left to go back to work, and he started having car problems. And I didn't have a cell phone. He had no way of getting in touch with me, and he had no idea where I was. So he comes back to, the place where we were in Alexandria, Ontario, and he lit into me because I should have somehow known that he was going to have car problems and would need to take the car that I normally used. That was the level of blame. And that's just a small example, but the kind of thing that he used to put on my shoulders, as if I could possibly know while I was out doing laundry that he was going to run into car problems, and that I was being a bad wife and mother by not somehow communicating to him where I was. So when he was gone, my real personality emerged, and I could finally see that this was not healthy. I still didn't call it abuse. I just thought, like everybody kind of uses the expression walking on eggshells. That's what it was.
I know.
That's what it was. I walked on eggshells all the time whenever he would come up. And he, even though I was the one tasked to raising the children, when he came up, suddenly he was in charge, that everything that I did was wrong, and I have lovely kids, and they, like, they weren't doing things that were bad, but he wasn't satisfied with anything that they did. So the long and short of it is that regarding signs, it wasn't until I started writing everything down that I could acknowledge to both myself and I could see it on the page. I could see where this was not healthy and it was not right.
Yes, and I can obviously I can still relate with many of your story, but one of them was in between those 3 weeks that he was out, that how yourself was able to come back to you, like,
Mm-hmm.
and I remember when my sister had to come down to Florida for my ex-husband to leave, and she came back and visited me about a month later, and she just said it. She says, "Wow, I can't believe this is my sister. This is the Denise that I know."
Mm-hmm.
Like, and it was just so instantly, like, bubbly and social butterfly and just
Mm-hmm.
talking to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And just like you, I didn't see it even though I knew things happened, but I
Mm-hmm.
was still not labeling it. And I don't think I labeled it for many years after that, once I became to, truly and genuine getting healing from everything that happened.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's an experience that it really shapes you, and like now, even when you know I've been single and I was going through my healing and I was just dating,
Mm-hmm.
I can pick it up now. Like, I'm like, oh no, he
Yeah.
made me feel like my ex-husband. So
Yeah.
like, no,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
so now it's easier to tell, but it's just that first time that is just very hard. And I have come across from young ladies that will say, oh, he just pushed me, but he usually doesn't do that, or
Mm-hmm.
he never will do that again. And I was explaining the next time it might be a punch. Like, ladies need to just kind of start realizing what's going on. And some of us, sometimes we just don't see it. We
Mm-hmm.
lean into hope,
Yes. Yes.
into a better tomorrow for
Mm-hmm.
everybody. And then everybody else around you, like my sister kind of could see it, but I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't.
Yeah.
So like I that really I resonated with that. Um, so I know you have a memoir,
Mm-hmm.
and it talks about your experience. When did you feel that it was time to start um, doing something about it, and helping and educating, and then writing the memoir?
I buried it for years. And again, my story was a little bit unusual because how I got out of the relationship was not divorce, it was death. So, what happened was I was up in Canada for almost 3.5 years, pretty much operating on my own, with him only coming up every couple of weekends, when he suddenly determined that scenario didn't work for him anymore. And he wanted
Hmm.
me to close the restaurant that I had worked so hard to establish, blamed me for every, even insinuated that I was the one that wanted to move to Canada in the first place. Um, his gaslighting was just off the charts.
Yeah.
And what happened was he totally took control when I moved back to the States. And I only moved back at the advice of an attorney because it was clear that he thought that he should get custody of the kids who were now 11, or no, actually they were 12, barely ever had a relationship with him, but somehow I was a bad wife and mother and he would make a better single father. He refused to contribute anything financially to either them or the property up there. And so I was really forced to move back. When I moved back, he was so controlling that this was all during the recession back in 2010, and I couldn't find a job. He refused to even get a landline. So, I mean, talk about isolation. He completely wanted to
Yeah.
isolate me. Um, I was driving around in a car that didn't have a functioning instrument panel with my kids. Dangerous situation, wouldn't get the car fixed. Every single level of financial control he exhibited. I left for a while, but I got into a situation when I almost, like, it was like jumping from the frying pan into the fire, where I was staying with some relatives, and as loving as they are, my kids hated it because they just they just didn't feel like they could be themselves. We had to leave our pets behind, and he
Mm.
finally kind of came to his senses when I left and begged me to return. And I'm not going to say that he changed, but what he did was he controlled his anger. But I knew something was really wrong, but he wouldn't tell me what. He would only consult his sister. And I knew he was telling her all these lies because one day before I moved down from Canada to the US, I found a notebook with all of his passwords to his computer and his emails. So I was reading his emails all the time. And what he was telling her and what was really happening were two different things. Like, for an example, um, I had canceled checks to the lawyer that was working on our immigration status. He claimed that I never did anything with that. That, like, it was one of the reasons why we had to move back was because I had never done anything with the immigration. He claimed that I had forced us into bankruptcy because of spending all this money. The money that was spent were to renovate some rental properties that we had, but when the housing market crashed and he had spent thousands of dollars on credit cards and we couldn't pay it back, that's why we ended up filing for bankruptcy. But he claimed it was my fault because I wasn't there. I was not the person charging these things. And I'm not saying he was out there buying, boats or luxury items, but I wasn't the person responsible. So I knew because of all the exchanges that he was making with his sister, there was something going on that he wasn't leveling with me about. And what it turned out to be is that he suspected that he was very sick, but he wouldn't do anything about it. And at one point, he was exhibiting these habits where anything that he ate would give him such acid reflux that he would start vomiting spit. So I finally went to the doctors and I said, I know you can't tell me what's going on with my husband, but if I came to you with these symptoms, what would you tell me? And she said, you have to get him to go to the doctors and have these tests immediately. He was furious with me. He wouldn't talk to me for days. But he finally went. And that's when we found out he had stage 4B esophageal cancer. And initially they gave him 2 weeks to live. He was also walking around with a broken neck because the cancer had eaten through his vertebrae. So a sneeze, a cough, the jolt in the car could have left him a quadriplegic. So we moved at the time we were living in New York, and we moved back to Massachusetts so that he could spend time with his family and get better care, because the area that we were in did not have a large cancer center, or, they didn't have the kind of treatment options we could get in Boston. So we moved into his sister's basement, which was a shit show because, of course, they were very concerned about his health. So I had to keep everything bottled up because I couldn't exactly reveal some of the things that he did and said in private. And he did not act with kindness because he was dying. He actually got worse in a lot of ways.
Mm.
So 6 months after he was diagnosed, he passed away, leaving twins and I penniless. He had refused to get out life insurance because he told me he did not want me to profit from his death. So when he died, I got a small short-term disability payment from his employer's insurance, and that was it. That's all I had. And I had the property in Canada. But selling that was a huge obstacle. Very, very complicated because I didn't even have a vehicle to go back and forth that was safe. So it took me years to dig out financially and to recover. And all of these things that happened, I just swept under the rug because I couldn't cope with them. I couldn't cope with the level of betrayal. I couldn't cope with acknowledging that this person that claimed to love me and claimed to love our kids could act so despicably that he didn't seem to care that he was leaving us in such a predicament. So it wasn't until COVID hit and I had that assignment and I started to unravel all of the things that he said in emails and the things that the gaslighting was horrible. At one point he claimed that when I was working in New York that I never had any job more than an admin job. And I was like, I just, out of sheer coincidence, I had been cleaning out the place in Alexandria in Ontario, getting rid of boxes of things that we had put up there. And I had all of my old invoices because even though I worked full time, I was not a salaried employee. I was a freelancer like everybody else in the advertising industry. We all had these jobs that we had for 3, 4, 5 years as freelancers. And I found all of my invoices and I threw them at him. I was like, you don't pay somebody who does admin work this kind of money and with this job description. But that was the kind of thing that he would completely ignore. So it was very easy for me just to cope with the day-to-day things instead of examining the things that would hurt me so much that I would just like go to tears. And then the other thing that really happened, and this comes back to the initiative, is that my husband was a charming lovely person to everybody else in his life. He was a beloved son. He was a beloved, brother. He had friends that absolutely adored him. All of my friends adored him. So when I started speaking out about what happened in my reality, if it was so bad, why did you stay?
Yeah.
And that's what I got constantly. So I stopped talking about it. I stopped being honest about my experiences because I lost friends over this. I lost friends that I had had for decades who would say, you shouldn't disparage him. He's dead. He's gone. Why are you talking about him like this? And they took his side of the argument. They believed that I was being the person that was betraying his memory. And the other thing is that I didn't want my children to know the depth of my despair. Every single day, because we were living in his hometown, I would encounter people who would say things like, oh, so what brought you here? Why did you move here? And what would I say? It was the type of scenario, oh, we moved here because my husband was dying of cancer. And so it was very, very easy, or much easier for me mentally and emotionally, just to shove it all under the rug and just try to rebuild my life. But what happened was I just became the ghost of myself. I did not socialize. I did not, going to the grocery store became traumatic because I kept on having to reference everything back to the shit show that he left me. I'm a diabetic. I couldn't afford to buy the foods that would keep my blood sugar low. I had to rely on very starchy carbohydrates just so I could feed my kids. So, and I never really thought about it, but that's a form of physical abuse. He impacted, I was a borderline diabetic who became a full-blown diabetic because I did not have access to the kinds of foods that kept my blood sugar low. He left me in poverty. So when I started writing about it, I'd never heard of the word financial abuse. I didn't know that it existed, but one of my classmates who had gone through something similar said, you have to write about this and you have to read these books. And the first book that she gave me was something called Why Does He Do That? And it was by Lundy Bancroft, I think his name is. And it was like reading my marriage. It was like the thing that you put in your mind is that you're the only one who's ever experienced any of these things. And you feel and believe that you are the center of the reason why these things existed. But when you start to see how many people also have these issues in their marriage and their relationships, then you start to understand maybe it's not me. Maybe when he says things like, what's wrong with you? Maybe turning the tables and saying, well, what's wrong with you? Would have been a better, suggestion, because he would never hold up a mirror to himself. Everything was always, and it wasn't just with me, everything was always everybody else's fault. He was treated poorly. When one of his colleagues would get a promotion, especially if it was a woman, well, gee, who's she sleeping with, kind of thing. He could never acknowledge that he was responsible for the outcome of certain scenarios. So he needed to shift the blame on somebody else, and it was very easy to shift it towards me.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess you became an easy target for him.
Hmm.
Just so many things are he display manipulation, narcissist, and the gaslighting, the insecurity and accountability. Like those things were not there, obviously. So how so he passed away. That was kind of like, I guess, your escape from it. What what are the things that you're doing now? Because I know you are the co-founder of I Know Where She Stayed.
Hmm.
And so what are some of the things that you are doing now to help other women?
Well, first, I'm going on lovely podcasts and talking about my experience to help people unravel their own experiences. Because when you start to hear other people talk about it and you get an idea that you're not alone, it makes it easier for other people to confront the very difficult things that they feel vulnerable about.
Right.
And writing about it, the memoir that I wrote originally called Our Better Selves really helped me in a way that I can't explain except in this way. Almost every single night after his death, I had nightmares. And the nightmare was always the same. He came back. He was living with the twins and I. He had cancer. He controlled everything. And I was almost powerless to stand up against him because of fear. After I wrote the memoir, I finally realized that the nightmares stopped, that I was no
Mm.
longer having that same dream over and over again, that sometimes I would wake up and I would have, like these crying jags. It was just incredible. So knowing the impact that writing had in my healing, I tried to put forth the effort to start an initiative, but I was doing it pretty much by myself and I had no idea what I was doing. So when I met my lovely co-founder, Kat and I met on a game show and we started talking and she ended up doing the cover for a work that I wrote of historic fiction called The Color of Frost. And The Color of Frost has a lot of very personal elements in it because it is about a woman who is married to a man that basically uses her inheritance. She ended up getting a very big inheritance due to a tragedy in her life, and he used the funds from that to go to dental school. And after he graduated, he basically dumped her and wanted her to vacate the house that they bought together with her money. So, and The Color of Frost takes place in 1974. And the reason why I centered it there was so that people could see the progress that women had made. Because in 1974, women couldn't get a mortgage on their own. They couldn't get a credit card. If they were married, their husbands went first. Like my husband in the 1980s, when I was making the lion's share of the money, the bank insisted putting his name first on the bank account. That was the
Well,
1980s. So we've come a long way, but it's very
yes.
easy for a younger generation to not understand that back then there were no women lawyers or doctors or attorneys. These are hard fought rights that we've won. And going back is what a lot of people want us to do. So the whole book is centered in that time period with kind of like almost a blueprint at the end for the I Know Why She Stayed initiative. So Kat, um, I hired her to do the book cover. And during those conversations, we started talking about some of the similarities that we had in our lives. But she
Yeah.
wasn't really at the point where she could identify some of those things in her past. So one day we were having this conversation, and I was like, well, what if what we did was you wrote your story and I wrote my story, and we just combine them and we call them I Know Why She Stayed, and we show how our different paths led us to this moment to work together. And that was about a year ago. And then through sheer coincidence and such luck, she had a friend, Justine, who she found out um, that she was between jobs and she had some time. And Justine made a complete difference because we tease her and we call her our coordinator of chaos. She is the glue that holds us together. So the three of us, and now with Lashante, we're this incredible team out there using you know, narrative storytelling to help people that have experienced things like we have to unravel the abuse that they've experienced and start to heal. Because it's easier to see it in somebody else. It's easier to identify it first in somebody else's story, just like it was easier for me once I started reading Why Does He Do That, to see what these other people had experienced and said, I'm not the only one. It's not
Yes,
just me.
exactly.
So that's what we're doing, and we're also creating tools so that people can safely access our material, so that it's not online, it's an offline tool that can be brought into communities and accessed in places that aren't in traditional settings. Because let's face it, number one, there's a little over 2,000 domestic abuse centers in the US, serving about 80,000 people annually. They don't have the resources, they don't have the money, they're underfunded, and most of them, the requirements to get into transitional housing create huge obstacles. So our program is brought into the communities to help people. Maybe a woman comes into an ER and she's got scars or she's got bruising, or she starts breaking down and telling them she doesn't want to go home. They can give her access to our program. She can utilize it when she's safe. She has agency in her own recovery. Kid kid in college, like this happened to my daughter. Her One of her roommates, her boyfriend was beating her. She had no idea what to do. These can be given out at the infirmary. They can be given out at hair salons, in churches, um, therapist's office. We have a therapist that we're working with right now that wants to utilize our program in like the crisis centers that she comes in contact with, in people that are experiencing, you know, the abuse and don't know how to navigate themselves away from it, because our program deals with all the different steps. If you've left, that's one thing. But if you haven't left, these are the things that you need to do to stay safe, because the most dangerous time for a victim of abuse is when they're getting ready to leave. When they've made that decision, that's when, either if the abuser finds out or they suspect, that is when they're in most danger. So we have taken our perspective and our knowledge of our own experiences and all the things that we've researched, and we've put it into a 4-pillar program. And we're going into communities. We're going to London with this program, and we have a lot of people that are very excited about it, utilizing it in the field with women that they encounter that don't feel comfortable going into a domestic abuse shelter, or they can't do it safely. They can keep our tools with them and access them at a library or at work or wherever. And our tools blend in to the scenery, so they're not something, and they're encrypted, so they're not something that are likely to be discovered. So
Yeah,
that's
that's
what
so
we're
good.
doing. It's
Yes.
I'm kind of using my writer superpowers. Kat and Justine, we're all writers. LaShante is a writer. We're using our creativity to better the world. We're using those things that are our strengths to help the most vulnerable people. And one thing I just want to add, I know I'm going on, but I really love what I'm doing. But I also don't think people understand the scope that domestic violence has on our society. We spend billions of dollars every year because of domestic abuse, because of a loss of income that people have due to their situation, not being able to work or whatever. We spend so much money on programs and things to help people recover, but it's also that cycle, because when somebody is coping with the impact of the trauma they've experienced, a lot of times, even if they're not abusive to their child, the child picks up that trauma. The child
Yeah.
senses the trauma, the behaviors, the um, ways that that parent has to cope with their past experiences. So it's this vicious cycle that repeats itself over and over and over again societally. And so until we start dismantling the narrative around, I know why she stayed, then we're not going to be able to really move forward. Because when people are asking, well, why didn't you just leave? Instead of asking, why did you just beat the shit out of your wife or your girlfriend? Then it's always put on the shoulders of the victim rather than those who are exhibiting these really destructive behaviors. So changing the narrative is what we need to do, and get people to gain insight as to why she didn't leave. I couldn't afford to leave. He made me give him receipts for gas. He made me give him receipts for groceries. A lot of times he wouldn't even trust me to go out and buy the groceries. He would go and buy them himself so I wouldn't have access to money. How am I supposed to rent an apartment? How am I supposed to feed my kids what am I supposed to do with my animals? What am I supposed to do for a job that I don't have an address? And if I'm living in my car, how do I get a job? So those are the things that need to change for people to understand that the behaviors that these people exhibit, the coercive control, the manipulation, the gaslighting, all of these things are at the center of why a person stays. And the financial abuse is what keeps them there.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing your story and what the organization is doing. As for me, the name truly impacted me because I went from being a victim of domestic violence to now feeling embarrassed because now I'm being judged by everybody in telling me why you stayed, you know. So you're dealing already with something while you're healing. Now you have to deal with, you know, feeling embarrassed and feeling okay, feeling judged because people, if you're not in somebody else's shoes, like it's hard for people to comment and have something to say about it. So like when I read the name, I was like, I immediately knew what it was, and I got very emotional, and I thought that, you know, there was lingering still there that I haven't healed, but I have, but it was more of knowing that you understand me. So I don't have to. I feel open, and you know exactly where I was and where I am now. So it was very impactful. Just the name alone is impactful. So I can't imagine everything else that is gonna come into place. And I'm very blessed to have met all four of you. Well, actually three. Lashante's coming soon. But thank you so much for sharing your story. And I hope and pray that this is impactful to somebody else.
And I have to thank you for providing such a wonderful platform for us and sharing, you know, your story and my story. It's kind of the same story. You know, it's like we all go through this, and knowing that people like you are out there giving my story voice and acknowledging that it is impactful empowers me to say, okay, I can do this. Because sometimes it's very tempting to say, I don't want to talk about it anymore. But I keep on talking about it, and I'm very grateful to you for allowing me to talk about it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome.